Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Flexibility is great. That's why there's yoga. Flexibility for your insurance coverage is great too. That's why there's United Healthcare Insurance Plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, United Healthcare Insurance Plans offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage for medical, vision, dental, and more. One of these plans may be right for you if you're, say, between jobs, coming off your parents' plan, turning a side hustle into a full hustle, or even missed open enrollment. Want more flexibility? Find out more about United Healthcare Insurance Plans at uh1.com.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found. That project manager I could never seem to hire? And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll & Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel. And it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media, at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I am here with Dr Jan Eppingstall, an Australian counsellor with a PhD in hoarding. Jan, how are you?
I'm great. Wonderful.
Glad to hear it. So in the past on the podcast, I have talked to Elizabeth Nelson, who is the child of a hoarder. That was episode 17 when I was a baby podcaster. And in last week's episode, I talked to Tracy McCubbin, who is a professional organizer and the child of a hoarder. And this is a really important issue that I think, I need to cover as much and as sensitively as possible. And so today with Jan, we are doing a deep dive into the impact that hoarding has on children. And some of this is going to be difficult to hear, but I think if anything, that makes it all the more important because
yes,
as hoarders, there is a line between stigma that is unnecessary and taking responsibility for what we do on the other side of things.
Yes.
And so children of hoarders are speaking out more than we've ever seen before. And they have a message that is so important for us to hear. And that message is that growing up in a hoard is damaging. So what is the psychological impact on children of growing up in a hoard?
The short answer to this is we know it's extremely damaging from the anecdotal evidence, like those that you've heard on your other pods, but we don't know the extent of the damage. And this is because the psychological impact of children growing up with hoarding parents is one that hasn't been considered in my opinion, in an acceptable way in the literature. Why is that? That's because the majority, if not all studies conducted till now, have sought out those willing to self-identify. So these are people who've accepted on some level that they have a hoarding problem. They have some insight into their problem, and we've focused on their thoughts and feelings as well as the signs, symptoms we have observed when interacting with them. This doesn't show us what goes on behind closed doors. So at the moment, we have no clear understanding of the psychological profile of people who hoard that don't engage in research or therapy.
Yeah.
So it's likely this group doesn't fess up because they're either concerned about being exposed or they don't think they have a problem. Unfortunately, what researchers and clinicians have failed to do so far is focus on the experiences of children in their homes when interacting with their hoarding parent or parents. So all the research and self-help books are really hoarder-centric, with the focus being on the person who hoards, not the children who are raised by them, even when they've been written with the sole purpose for assisting family members to help the person who hoards in their life.
Because that is a thing. Often when you come across stuff around children of hoarders, it's how can you help your parents, not how are you?
Exactly right. And even researchers who have kind of tried to tackle the question of impact on kids, they still saw it from the person who hoards perspective. For example, there was a study of kids' tendency to reject their hoarding parents. I mean, this doesn't validate the lived experience of children of hoarders, and it certainly doesn't shine a light on the reasons children reject their parents. Basically, we failed to acknowledge the lived experience of children of hoarders in their own right. So we see them through the lens of the person who hoards in the literature currently. And the majority of researchers and clinicians encourage children to help the parent, not look at their own mental health.
Yeah, and there are other damaging aspects as well as what it does to a child psychologically. There are risks with things like fire safety in a hoarded home. There can be insect bites if somebody has an infestation. Even not having a place to do homework can affect their educational achievements. And I would imagine that all adds up to a lot of stress.
It does, but I think it's so much more than that. I think there is a need for us to use radical empathy to imagine what it would truly be like to grow up with a parent who hoards. Yes, there are physical dangers of tripping or being trapped under collapsing towers or stuff, unsanitary meal prep areas and bathrooms and things like that, infestations, respiratory illnesses, etc. And then there is the fear of being discovered if something needs to be repaired. So this is avoided at all costs. We know that if you're living alone, it's it's up to you, isn't it? It's your choice. But if you've got children, there might be no heating or cooling or no running water, no refrigeration, because calling the repair person is such a huge risk to that status quo of the hoard, thus the hoarder. The overwhelming clutter of the hoard that is protected by the parent often leads to a lack of privacy for young people as well, inappropriate sleeping arrangements such as sharing beds with adults or sleeping in shared spaces on couches or on the floor. Although these aspects are a result of a mental illness and often unintended consequences, they still add up to trauma.
Unintended consequences are still consequences.
Consequences, exactly.
Before I started looking into this in any detail, before I spoke to Elizabeth in that first interview, I'd thought of the issue as kind of, it must be hard to not be able to invite your friends over, that kind of thing. And yes, definitely, I hadn't considered how wide ranging it was. I think it was Elizabeth who said her parents would go through her bin, she would throw something away in her bedroom and, they would go through it before it. And that's really, what if you're 16 and you've done a pregnancy test, or, what if it's anything, your old diary, but
Yeah.
also the stuff around, well, we come on to this in a bit, but the stuff around parents valuing their stuff over their child is kind of mind blowing to me. Like the damage that would do.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
So, why is it important for parents to understand what hoarding is like for their children? Like, why we're doing this episode, really?
Yeah. Well, as a parent myself, I understand it's a difficult job. There's no doubt about it. It could be the most difficult but important job in the world. Living with a mental illness makes parenting even more difficult. Living with hoarding disorder adds another physical element that's going to negatively impact your children's psychosocial growth. Full stop. Hoarding behaviours are a result of trauma. I mean, trauma isn't our fault. We didn't ask for those things to happen to us, and we wish someone had stepped in and stopped it, protected us. So we need to take responsibility for our actions and step in to protect our children, even if it's from ourselves. And I think that's really hard for people to hear. But once you've looked at this, as you and I have, and you've talked to other children of hoarders, as I have, you can't look away. Like, you can't look away from what this can do to children.
A lot of children of hoarders describe having to keep their parents' secret for them. What does that do to a child?
Yeah, although other experts might disagree with me, this is definitely traumatic. I mean, being told that no one can find out about the home environment leads to hypervigilance, where kids are on constant alert for child protection or the landlord, and they're monitoring and second guessing everything they say and do. But it goes further than that, because the parent who hoards engages in emotional abuse to protect the hoard. Emotional blackmail, gaslighting, denial, suppression are some of the ways that they manipulate children to keep the secret. You'll be taken away if anyone finds out, or I'll go to jail if they see the house. If you love me, you'll keep this secret, or you must hate me if you want to tell someone.
That's what abusers in people who abuse in other ways. It's the exact same language, even.
Exactly. It's that control factor, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the part of hoarding that is coming out here with children, is that control. When it's only you and your possessions, you're not necessarily impacting anyone else if you're living alone. I mean, of course, there's neighbours, etc. But with the family situation, it is control, and it extends. It doesn't stay with just the possessions. It extends further than that. And a child who has to keep such secrets will feel isolated and extremely lonely. They're unable to share themselves fully with other people their age, and they'll feel ashamed because they live so differently to others. At a certain stage, they're likely to close down to real connections and avoid rejection, and have kind of just superficial friendships, if any. If anyone notices perhaps dirty clothes, lack of school equipment, or parents forgetting to pick up the child, which can regularly happen, and questions are asked, the child is forced to protect the parent because they know that the repercussions of talking are just too high. And we know that other kids are cruel as well. So bullying and ostracizing those that don't fit in will definitely occur. It also means kind of that there's no help. No one comes to babysit or help with yard work because we're protecting, the family is a closed unit with the hoard as the only focus. And one of the ways I think that helps explore kind of the psychological impact of a hoarding parent on children is to see the family unit like a cult in a way. And in order to make that kind of more palatable for listeners, we might say that hoarding disorder is the cult leader, basically. So the needs of the person who hoards are being met by the hoard, and everyone else is recruited to make sure that this continues to happen. And I've heard that used with things like OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder is like a cult leader. And it really is dictating how everyone else behaves, because we're attempting to protect the parent who has this disorder. But in doing that, we're exacerbating and creating an unsafe and unhealthy environment.
And you hear from children of alcoholics, children of depressed parents, children of all parents with all kinds of struggles, that kind of walking on eggshells all the time, always thinking, if I do this, how will my mum react? Or if I do that, what will my dad say? And it's that ongoing underlying stress, isn't it? It's not so much one giant trauma. It's an ongoing underlying trauma that is 24/7.
Exactly. And it impacts every thought and decision that you make. And as I said before, you're hyper vigilant. How will mum react? What will dad say? And mum might cry, and that might be, mum might not get angry, for example, but mum might go to bed for days, or mum might, and that for a child is it's just so difficult for them to separate themselves from mum's reaction.
Yeah. And this thing about children feeling their parents value their stuff over them, how does that affect somebody growing up? Because it's bad enough when a kid thinks their parents value a sibling over them. Like, they love my sister more than me. Never mind like an old pizza box and a mail order catalogue. What does that do?
Yeah, look, again, this is something we only really know from anecdotal reports. But when someone appears to value an inanimate object over a child, there's likely to be a deep sense of worthlessness and shame that develops. There's evidence that children will have future relationship problems in their lives because this results, this type of behaviour or valuing possessions over children is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that constant small interpersonal traumas that occur over life. Setting healthy boundaries, insecure attachment, abandonment issues, perfectionism. There will also be some vulnerabilities to other serious mental illnesses, such as hoarding, of course, eating disorders, OCD and related disorders, substance and alcohol misuse, and personality disorders, because there is that sense of worthlessness and shame. I'm not as good as the objects that mum or dad are saving.
It's that cyclical thing, isn't it? If you hoard and your child grows up with that trauma, then you might hoard because of your trauma, but they then go into adulthood with trauma that may manifest in hoarding, may manifest in something else. When I was quite young, a friend died by suicide, and she had a child. And I remember somebody saying at the time, it's not just that he's lost his mum, it's that this makes him terrifyingly likely to do the same as an adult. Like, if a parent dies by suicide, the child as an adult often does many years later. And it feels like that with hoarding. Like, Tracy, who I spoke to last week, went the opposite direction. She went from, dad was a hoarder, I am going to organise everybody. Whereas others go in the same direction as their parent. However much they promise themselves as a kid that their life would be different, how do you make it different? It's really hard.
I think that, often people have said to me, oh, well, my mum's father was an alcoholic, so she promised she would never be an alcoholic, so she's a hoarder. So the same with this, chances are you'll use some other way to manage because of the dysfunction and the inability to have healthy relationships with people, with stuff, with substances, etc. It's that cycle that I hope our generation will break.
When I worked with young people who self-harm, there was a real pattern of if they were doing, it was nearly all young women, if they were doing well with not self-harming, then they weren't eating. And if they started self-harming again, then they could eat for a bit. And it was always one or the other. And getting rid of both seemed impossible for them. It was just,
because they needed something to
yeah,
manage their emotions. They just didn't have the capacity to sit with the emotion. So therefore, it's either, I'm not eating,
yeah.
or I'm harming. I get that, and it's hard to do the work, but we have to try and break that cycle.
We do. And so if somebody's listening and they are a parent, how can they use this knowledge about the impact on their children as motivation to de-hoard?
I think it's easy to hear this and feel blamed and attacked. This is the way the establishment sees the stories and assertions of children of hoarders at this point in time. Hoarder-centric views are the norm because people who hoard are seen as the ones that need empathy, compassion, assistance, and support. And they do, but so do their children. So if you are a parent who hoards, please know I'm not here to judge or shame you. I know you probably have an inkling of the harm your hoarding is doing to your children, or you think it's not that bad in your home, so this doesn't apply to you. But I want you to realize that you are the most important person in your child's lives and can have the biggest impact on their development. You can change, and this is your chance to demonstrate to your kids that everyone can evolve and grow at any age. So I see that as a motivation. I don't want people to feel like I'm here pointing a finger saying, duh, 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 because that never works. Shaming and attacking people never works. But it's opening yourself up to seeing how this can happen and also understanding that you can change.
Because even if a child has been damaged by living in a hoard, that child seeing their parent overcome this, that's an incredible lesson for them, isn't it?
Exactly. And it gives them the sense that, hey, mum or dad are resilient. Mum or dad listened to me or paid attention enough to me to see that I needed things to change. And that is incredibly powerful. Incredibly so. I think that, if that's something that you can do, then that's amazing. And I know you can.
A lot of people who hoard, parents or not, are afraid to admit they've got a problem and even more afraid to seek help. And I was thinking that with parents, that might be magnified because they will assume that their suitability as a parent will be brought into question. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, it's definitely a big concern for many people. And what I will say to that is, what is more important, your problem remaining hidden or the safety and health of your kids? As a clinician, if someone contacts me seeking help and there are safety issues that are impacting children, I take that as a huge positive step. So for me, calling me is the first stage of change, and that is the sign of a good parent. So if you're questioning whether you should or shouldn't, the clinicians out there, if you're taking that step forward and you're willing to move towards change, then help seeking is a good sign. And it is taking you in the direction of where you need to go. And I speak for myself, but I would never think to take matters further with a situation like this if someone has called me and said, I need help, and also without discussing it with the client. I would never walk in and just throw my hands in the air and say, no, not happening, I would always view them calling me and asking me to help as a very good sign and a sign of a good parent.
So I read this quote in a Psychiatric Times article, but that's a fun read.
Mm-hmm.
And I will link to it in the show notes. And it made me really sad. It said, even when the house is unfit, hoarders often view their children as safest under their care. Some hoarders will expose their children to abhorrent conditions rather than face public scrutiny and risk losing them. What can parents learn from this observation?
I think one of the hardest things for all of us to do is to be objective about how we live our lives and parent our children. And because the tendency of hoarders is to isolate and control what's theirs, there is a tendency to extend this to children, not just possessions. So when we isolate ourselves from the wider community, we tend to get kind of a lot more paranoid and self-centered because we've lost touch with what's going on out there. The pandemic allowed many of us to experience this for the first time. We were under the impression that, it was like the purge or something. We're in our homes and we're not seeing what's really happening. Most people have a very skewed perception of how authorities deal with situations such as children in a hoard. They also underestimate the impact of their behaviours and overestimate and catastrophize the impact of the alternatives. So, oh my goodness, if they're taken away, immediately the children are running away and they're homeless or whatever. They really take it to the nth degree. Many people are so controlled by the cult of hoarding disorder and avoiding anxiety for themselves that they can't see what it's doing to the kids. Fresh eyes regarding the safety of your home really does need to happen. And one of the hardest things to hear is don't trust your perspective because it is actually warped by the disorder.
That's so hard, isn't it?
It is so hard.
I used to know someone she was a single mom and she was living in housing that was bad. Like there was mold, it was really unsuitable. And she was like waiting to be rehoused and it seemed to be going on forever. And she put her children in care temporarily because she didn't want them to live in this mouldy, unsuitable house. And it broke her heart. It broke her heart that her children had to go somewhere else for a few weeks. But she felt that protecting them was paramount and more important than it breaking her own heart. And then she got rehoused and got them back and all was well. But parenting is all about really hard. I'm not saying listeners need to put their children in care, but parenting is all about really hard choices.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And it's so often putting aside, our needs and wants in order to offer safety and security for our children. And coming at it from that perspective, it just changes how we're behaving in our lives. I think it's quite powerful to think about it that way. And I think that's a really good example of someone who's, she's heartbroken to do that, but she knows that she needs to do something in order to move forward. And that's sometimes the hardest part for people. They can't seem to get out of their own way in order to move forward. They can't make those decisions because of the anxiety, because of the, the need to manage emotions with stuff.
Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a de-hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So if someone's listening to this, and I expect there's a few thinking this, if they're thinking, yeah, but this doesn't apply to my kids. My kids are fine, they're happy, they're functioning. Is that true?
I mean, the reality is children will adapt to the situation they find themselves in. So because they rely on parents completely for safety and security, they'll do everything they can in order to survive in that environment. And this often means, in quite a few cases, or quite often, it means being extremely responsible and what we call parentified. So this is when a child takes on the adult responsibilities in the home, taking care of cooking, cleaning, shopping, childcare, etc. This is the people pleaser and perfectionist, often a female child, who wants to make everything okay for everyone by managing all aspects of the home environment. They'll not tell you about their difficulties because they actually believe it's their job to keep you happy. So when you're unhappy, children think it's their fault. So they can fix it. I know I can fix it by being a better child. And that's just the egocentric nature of children. They'll do what they can to make things right. So they're fine, they're happy, they're well adjusted. I would say, how do you know? Are you willing to hear the truth? And have your children talk to a professional in confidence. Even then, you're unlikely to know the full extent of the impact until they're adults, because it doesn't really it's not immediately obvious. And they will feel happy because that's what they know. And they know that when things are happy at home and everything's, settled, that I'm happy. But they'll keep continuing to try to make everything just perfect, just right for, their parent. So it's a tough one. It's really hard.
It is. The family you grow up in or the circumstances you grow up in are just what you've always known, aren't they? It often takes going into adulthood, leaving home, to look back and think, that wasn't right. And yeah, like you say, that kind of people-pleasing thing that can come out if things are wrong is something I absolutely relate to. I didn't grow up in a hoarded house, but I certainly had a parent who was difficult, and I had to keep the peace. That was my one role in life. And of course I couldn't, because I was a child who had no impact whatsoever on that kind of thing. But in my head, it was all, if that parent was very upset, that meant I wasn't a good enough person. Yeah. And so what can I do to be a better person? And if that meant being happy, that meant being happy. And, and you don't know you're living under those circumstances until you're not living under those circumstances, I think.
Exactly. And you're kind of approached by, someone else describing their home, or you experiencing someone else's parental kind of relationship, and you think, oh, wow. Oh, that's odd. That didn't happen in my home. And then you kind of realize, and it does take becoming an adult to recognize that. But we're the parents, so we need to be the ones to make the environment such that our children can grow and live in safety and comfort. We're the parents.
And nobody's expecting you to get everything right, because
no,
but if there are things that are known to be damaging, there's a responsibility there to address them.
Yeah, exactly.
Is growing up with a hoarding parent correlated with other forms of abuse? So I guess there's two parts to that. First of all, do hoarding parents often commit other forms of abuse? Or more indirectly, can growing up with hoarding make children more vulnerable to abuse by outsiders? Like, I can see, I can envisage parents who might avoid taking their child to a doctor for something because they don't want it to come out.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the breadth of abuses that can occur are kind of due to that need for the hoarder to control all aspects of the home, and they're kind of wide ranging. We talked about parentification and also caregiving for parents who have additional physical disabilities, because we know there is a link between trauma and, other types of neurobiological disorders, etc. So that's a big thing, being the caregiver. But something else can also occur when a parent uses their child to get their own emotional needs met, much they would from an adult spouse, which is, of course, completely inappropriate. It's known as emotional incest, which I don't really like the phrase,
No.
but it's a horrible phrase. But
Yeah.
it kind of really, it really does impact significantly on that child that's sort of there to prop up the parent's emotional sense of self, which is really problematic for someone growing up with that type of parenting style. I mean, of course, neglect and the absence of care and attention leading to squalor and those types of things, health problems can result. I think one of the things that is really not recognised is, punishment for touching or moving or tossing or giving away or using parents' possessions. It can range from physical violence in some cases to emotional abuse like silent treatment or verbal abuse. So protecting that hoard and using punishment is really quite common. One of the things that can happen, talking about vulnerability to abuse, is that the trauma of living in a hoard can lead children to seek out other environments that they might find themselves then being vulnerable to abuse by outsiders. Like a neighbour might invite a child to swim in their pool or have a shower or have a home-cooked meal, knowing they can hold their secret of what's happening in their home over them, and then other abuses can occur. I think that is really distressing for many people when they recognise that they may not think it's that bad, but then if their child is seeking out, other more appealing environments, etc., or going to clubs or doing all these other things, there is that vulnerability because they do have a secret. They do have a secret that they're holding, and that means, they can be manipulated. Someone will, I might call Child Protective Services, and it's just
And especially if that child believes their role is to keep adults happy and that's, the most important thing they have to do, then when faced with somebody trying to groom them for other things, they are already ready to do what that adult says they need to be kept happy.
To do.
Yeah.
And that is just, it's heartbreaking.
It is. And even stepping back slightly from the psychological and emotional impact, I imagine that a lot of children of hoarders reach adulthood with a lot of practical skills missing. Like, if there's no space in the kitchen, do they know how to cook? As well as more obvious skills around organising and cleaning. How do you learn how to vacuum if there's never been enough space on the floor to vacuum? Are those skills they can catch up on as an adult?
Yeah, being unable to adult is one of the things I've heard from children of hoarders. They grew up in constant survival mode and they have to adapt to all these new challenges every day. So they're most probably highly resilient and inventive, getting around situations. But all those skills that many of us learn in childhood and teen years are often missing because there was no access or space or money or time, like how to manage the laundry or organize paperwork. Managing time is really a big one. Planning, managing money, they can all be kind of mysteries when children of hoarders go out on their own. But I think it's important to note that one of the symptoms of complex PTSD, which comes from that interpersonal trauma, is difficulty making decisions, organising, problem solving, time management, planning. So the first thing to tackle for children of hoarders is the trauma that you faced. See a practitioner who specialises in treatment of interpersonal trauma to deal with your mental health first, and then that will allow you to engage in learning how to improve your executive function, because I think that could be quite destabilizing if you go to try and learn all these things and you just can't quite get the frontal lobe connected, and you're just feeling like I'll never be able to do it, when there might be some some elements of complex trauma there that you need to address first. So I would always say to children of hoarders, and I know that's something that many of them are advocating, have a trauma assessment, regardless of if you're still trying to help your parent and you're a mature adult. Have that trauma assessment, because that will help you with other parts of your life as well, including relationships, etc.
And I think it's important for us to say, if you are the child of a hoarder and you want to help your parent, that's great. But there should not be an obligation to do so. I will link to the excellent Children of Hoarders group, as they often say, like, we don't expect children of alcoholic parents to fix their parents' addiction. And so similarly, we shouldn't expect children of hoarders to fix the hoarding situation. We just can't.
No, we can't make someone else change for us, as much as we wish we could.
God, yes. So much energy in our lives spent trying to get other people to not be the way they are. So from friends who have children, I know that kids can make a lot of mess. I mean, even Marie Kondo has given up on decluttering. Have you heard this?
No.
Seriously, she said that now she's got kids, she's just not interested in, she's just focused on her kids now and doesn't really tidy up anymore.
I called it with my friends. I said, Marie Kondo, as soon as she has children, this is all going to go out the window. Yes.
There we go.
That's right.
But in terms of practicality, while children can be a motivation to de-hoard, they must also get in the way, practically speaking.
Yeah, exactly. They definitely get in the way and make de-hoarding difficult. Everything becomes more difficult with little ones. They like to pull things out and explore their surroundings. They want to put things in their mouth as a way to learn about the world. And I guess that's why it's so important to critically assess our surroundings from a baby or a kid's level as we're coming up to parenthood, because there's things there that you wouldn't even consider are dangerous or are harmful. So we really do need to kind of be thinking about that. But they do make it difficult. There's no doubt about that. Time just disappears in the day. And then, if you are spending a lot of time organising, etc., when you have little kids, that sets an expectation, or it sets, sets them up to see, oh, mum's always busy with this other stuff. Mum's always doing things and messing around with that. Oh, I wish she'd play with me more, or whatever along those lines. It's definitely takes our time away from being with our children.
And I know a lot of children, if you try and persuade them to get rid of their toys that they haven't played with for a year, they resist and resist and resist and resist. And I'm kind of trying to imagine an interaction where the parent is a hoarder and so relates all too well to the child wanting to keep the thing. And
definitely,
yeah, that could be tricky.
That is definitely tricky. I know some people who, they have a limited number of toys. They try to keep it to a manageable number, and they have a rotation system. So particularly with littler kids, we bring things out and they seem brand new and then we put them away. The other thing I think is really hard, I was talking about this with a client the other day, just saying kids are because they're so egocentric, every little artwork that they've made, you ask them, do you want to keep this, Sally? Oh, yes, of course. They might have just got the pen and just put a line on it, but that is, I've made that. It's my art. And I think that's really tricky, but it is important to help your children learn how to let go of things. And when they get to about 7, 8, 9, that's where they actually can kind of understand, oh, maybe I don't need to keep that. I think sometimes we try to, lots of people try to force them when they're super little to make these decisions, and they just haven't got the cognitive ability. So, once they get to that stage where they can actually say, no, that's a good picture, that one, or that's a great toy, but I no longer play with it and I know someone who would love it, you can actually kind of get them to let go. But I do think it's important to not do it without them.
I agree.
Because then that's just doing the same thing that maybe happened to you as a child, your parent going through your things and throwing away something that they didn't know meant a lot to you, like a stone that you found, or, you know what I mean? It's just, it needs to be kind of thought through from their perspective as well as your perspective. But when children are not showing interest in keeping things and you're a hoarder, we need to talk about that, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
And there are also, the one I find difficult to witness is when a child has some kind of comfort item that they've had since they were a baby. And often it's, I'm trying to think of the international name for these, a dummy, the thing you suck.
Yeah. What do they, we call it a dummy in New Zealand and Australia. Do they call it?
I feel like there's
America.
a different name for it. Anyway, the plastic rubber thing, they suck. And there's pacifier, there we are, thank you. There's often like, oh, you're 3 now, you've got to, and like, oh, well, and I see all kinds of like, we'll put them on the Christmas tree and Father Christmas will take them away, or we will, and I sometimes just think, let them have the thing. And I don't know whether that's me as a hoarder thinking that. Because they'll drop it at some point, won't they? They're not going to be sucking their dummy at 12. It's highly unlikely.
Exactly.
So I feel like you're fighting a losing battle if you go for that article that has comforted them since the day they were born.
That's right. I mean, they were wrapped in that muslin, like my boys when they were first born. And so they kept those and they've still got them. Yeah. I mean, they don't touch them or look at them, but they've got them, and fighting that battle, sort of seems, I don't know, almost sadistic in a way, because
it does.
It's kind of, the dummy thing is interesting too, because my second son had his for quite, I don't even remember when he stopped, but he lost it. I only kept one, and one day it just got lost, and that was really hard because he was really quite upset, but he managed to get through it. We had to, oh, I'm sorry, you lost it, there aren't any more. We had to really go through a grieving process for it. And a special toy that he lost as well was rediscovered in the compost heap 5 years later. I don't know how it got into the compost heap, but it did. And my husband's brought it in and gone, here's Woofy. He's here. Oh, so amazing. So amazing. So Woofy's still around, although he was lost for 5 years. He's back.
And he's not turned into compost.
No, nothing happened to him. He didn't decompose. So, hey, but I do think it feels a little bit, if there's special things for your child, know what those are,
Yeah.
But it does take them, they need to be a little bit more mature. And I'm sure that's to do with the stages of development, Erickson, etc. There'll be stages where things become, more concrete and they can understand that things don't disappear, etc. It's related to that. So we need to be knowledgeable about childhood development in some way so that we're not trying to push children to do things they can't actually do.
Here's a cool fact. A crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Another cool fact, you can get short-term health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans are designed for people who are between jobs, coming off their parents' plan, or turning a side hustle into a full-time gig. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. Get more cool facts about United Healthcare short-term plans at uh1.com.
Hey everyone, I'm Craig Robinson, co-host of the Ways to Win podcast, alongside my good friend John Calipari. I've been on the go recently. Phoenix, Kansas City, Chicago. If you're like me and have a home but aren't always at home, you have an Airbnb. Hosting your home or a spare room is a very practical side hustle. If you live in a big game town, you can Airbnb your place for fans to stay in. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
And so what we've done now is divided up children into different age groups. I thought kind of, as you were saying, different developmental stages, different understandings of the world. It would be quite different advice for different parents of different groups. So we're going to start by looking at if you have a child who is anything from a baby to 10 years old, what kind of things should a parent be doing if they hoard and their children are that age?
Yeah, I mean, birth to 2 years are extremely important. That's an extremely important stretch of time for brain development and learning. But the first 2 months of life are crucial. And this might be difficult to hear, but if in the first 2 months of life we experience any high adversity events without that counterbalance of relational support from an attachment figure, even if we're then placed in a healthy environment for the next 12 years, we fare worse than those with low adversity in those first 2 months and high adversity for the next 12 months. So our relationship with our children is the most important thing. Our focus must be on the well-being of our kids and building that strong, secure attachment with them, not on how to manage our stuff. If you find yourself spending hours acquiring and sorting and organising and not connecting and building that strong attachment to your children, it's time to reflect on your values and seek psychological help for yourself and your children separately. Because this is the time where, the development of your child, that is going to impact the rest of their life. So we need to be thinking about that. Now, if we can counterbalance it with relational support, translation, if we can change our behaviours and our connection with our child within that period of time, we can counteract that. But if we continue the way we're going, that will not happen. But we need to be, be the one to break the cycle before the thing you've inherited passes down to the next generation. You might think that your inheritance is cash or a house, but it could actually just be trauma. So be the one to break the cycle. And this is the crucial time to do it between the ages of, in that first 2 years are super important. The first 2 months, critical, but anything up to 10 years, 12 years, we really need to be connecting and creating those secure attachments with our kids.
And with slightly older children, say they're between 10 and 18, they have more awareness of the outside world. They might have visited friends' houses more and seen that their home is different to their friends. They are becoming adults. They're becoming young adults and increasingly independent. There's a lot of changes going on. What are the most important steps for a parent who hoards to be taking at that age?
So, exactly what you just detailed. It's a time in a child's life about growing, they're growing into an autonomous individual. And if you find that your child or you are ashamed to have people visit because of the hoard, you need to seek help. Be mindful that your child requires privacy at this age. This is a really critical stage, and the right to make decisions about how their space is kept. The clear area in their room or cupboard is not storage space for your stuff. If they want to let go of items that you think they should keep, ask yourself why. Is it because you have an attachment to it? Is it because it was yours? Or perhaps you think it's a waste to let it go. But let them let it go. You have to give them the chance to make their own decisions about what they value, because they will more than likely mirror what your values are if that is something that will keep the peace. They're learning how to become individuals. And we're here to guide our children, not control them. And if you don't want your behaviours to be passed down to your children, seek help for yourself now. So I guess just be the change you want to see in the world. Working on yourself and your mental health is often seen by parents that have children in this age group as selfish. But it could be the very thing that actually brings you closer to your children. And do please find at this point independent support for your kids. They need to be able to share their thoughts and feelings with a trusted professional and their experiences so that they can heal from their trauma. There is often this thought that, you can have family therapy, etc. Look, maybe eventually, but I don't think that family therapy at this point is going to be effective, because there needs to be that ability to say their truth, your children to say their truth and their experiences, their lived experience. So I think this time is about allowing the child to have their own space, and privacy is super important. It really, really is. They're growing, there's lots of things going on, lots of changes, and if they're sleeping in the living room or, with you in the bed, etc., it's just,
or even they can't close their bedroom door because there's stuff.
Or they don't have a door on their bedroom because you've taken it off so that you can fit more stuff in. All that sort of stuff, if they can't close their door or open their door fully or whatever, these things just, they need to have their own space. Even if you're working to improve the rest of the home, and please, if they let go of things, don't go through the bag and pull them back out again, please. And tell them that you are. And if there is something in there that you desperately can't let go of, that you like, something that is super important, just take it out. But don't shame them for not wanting it, because that is just, that is a really difficult thing for kids to, I made that decision. I'm learning how to make decisions for myself. Let me make that decision. It doesn't mean you don't have to save it if it's something super, super, super important, but it can't just be because you think it's worth that it's something you can sell, or, you know what I mean? It has to be something that's really important.
The thing about family therapy, again, if because of their upbringing, your child already feels responsible for your emotional well-being, I feel like family therapy would make that worse, not better.
And all you get is just, the mask. Because there's just no way, there's no way of being open and honest in that environment. You'll just keep your mask on as a child and say, no, everything's fine, no problem. And if you really if mum and dad or family are perhaps quite abusive, punishing, etc., I mean, you're just not going to get any result from family therapy in that way. It's just not suitable.
And if somebody is listening and they are the parent of an adult child, what do they need to do and keep in mind? I guess we would start with not expect your child to fix the problem.
Yes. If your child grew up in a hoarded environment from a young age, they are traumatized. I know it wasn't intentional in most cases. You didn't set out to harm them, but you did. So even if your children are super supportive and endeavour to help you to manage your hoard at every chance they get, their lives have been significantly impacted and continue to be impacted by your behaviours. But they need to live their own lives. They're not the help. Just because you gave them life doesn't mean they're beholden to you. That's a hard one for many people to kind of recognise. I mean, I get that you feel ashamed and don't want anyone to know about the situation at home, or you're too anxious to let anyone else touch your belongings. But think about what your children are missing out on by helping you when you haven't sought to change. So, I mean, maybe they never had romantic relationships or friendships because they've always been your sole support. Or maybe they take time away from weekend family activities or holidays to make sure that you're safe. Or you don't see them at all because they won't visit you at home and you're estranged. I mean, it could be any number of things. But whatever the state of your relationship with your children, you need to seek help for yourself and come to terms with the impact that your mental illness has had on your family. There is a way back, but you have to do the work. You can actually repair relationships, but there has to be, you need to do the work. And your children also need to seek treatment because there is no doubt that this experience has significantly impacted their emotional growth. And it has the potential to negatively influence the lives of the next generation. So if you're able to step up and say, I'm seeking to change, then perhaps your children will not pass that trauma on to your grandchildren. I think that's one of the things that's really important for us to realise, that this transgenerational trauma, now we understand it. I feel like now's the time. I've said it numerous times. I think, we're at the point now where we know enough. We don't know much, but we know enough to say that we need to break the cycle. And, I want that for you. I want that for the people who are listening. And I want that for the adult children of hoarders or the teenage children of hoarders who are listening to this. I want you to be able to, have a relationship with your parent who has recognised that they, that they need to change. That's what I want for everybody listening.
Because I know we both wanted to be really careful with this episode, to be clear that we're not shouting at people. We're not saying you're terrible people. I am a hoarder. I don't have children, but I am a hoarder. I'm not coming at this from a point of objectivity. And still, it feels important that we make clear that this isn't victimless, while also not saying you should be ashamed of yourself.
Exactly. Spot on. Couldn't have said it better. Yeah, exactly. It is not victimless, but there's no wagging fingers. There's no pointing. There's no blame. It's, if you're here and listening to this, we both just want you to understand that you can change, and we're not wagging our fingers at anybody. There's no blame, shame. We understand this is an extremely difficult mental health issue, and there's no downplaying that. But seeking help is important for the future of your family and future generations of your family.
And for yourself.
And for yourself. That's right.
It's not all selfless. I know a lot of parenting is about selflessness, and a lot of parenting is about screwing up. A lot of parenting is about going, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. Or going, I shouldn't have done that, and I don't care because I'm that angry. And there's all kinds of ways all parents screw up. Your kid will end up in therapy one way or the other, but try not to make it for this.
Exactly. But it is so, like, we all make these mistakes, and we, as adults, we kind of think that that we can't show we can't show weakness. Like, oh my God, if I tell them I did the wrong thing, then they're not going to, respect me or listen to me again. And it's like, you know what? They're much smarter and more mature than you would ever think, and they can cope.
And if you tell them that you did the wrong thing, you model that for them to then be able to admit when they do a wrong thing, which of course they do too.
Exactly. And having them come to you and say, look, Mum, I didn't tell you I did this. I feel bad I didn't tell you. You just think, well, it was all worth it. It was all worth admitting that I did the wrong thing, because we are only human. We're just not better than any child, not better than anyone else. And we don't have control over people. We do not. And we do certainly, I don't know about you, but I always used to think, why can't, you're in the supermarket, why can't they control their children? And now I just give them a knowing glance.
Yeah, 100%. I used to be, why is that child screaming? Why is the parent? Whereas now I have friends who've had kids that ages, and I've been in the supermarket with them. I just look at the mum or the dad and go, oh, you poor thing.
Oh, we've all been there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that this is happening to you right now, because they're probably in a rush to get somewhere, and that has just led to the the outburst. But yeah, I think we're in a different era now with, parent-child relationships, and we need to kind of embrace that and be more flexible.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the things that, we do so much more of, is we learn how to repair. We can't always we're certainly not perfect. So that means we need to learn that reparation process. And that's one of the things that I think is super important. Super, super important. How can you repair, when it's not about the break, it's about how you repair it.
100%. So, Jan, if people want to find you online, where can they do so?
They could go to Instagram, where my handle is @stuff_ology, or Twitter, the same, @stuff_ology. Or they could catch up with me on Facebook, which is Stuffology Consulting, or one word, or shoot me an email, jan@stuffology.com.au.
And go to stuffology.com.au and sign up for the newsletter, which is a little gem every Sunday.
It's a bit of a a happy point in the weekend when I send out my newsletter. So sign up. It's free.
Do. It's very good. In fact, it was somebody told me to look you up in the early days of the podcast, and I signed up to a newsletter, and got one about trauma, and it was so good that that's why I invited you onto the first podcast, was to talk about trauma and hoarding, because you just nailed it. And look where we are now.
Look at where we are now. Amazing. Amazing. Well, I do enjoy writing it, and I love feedback. So if anyone's, getting my newsletter and they want to talk to me, feel free. I love chatting with readers.
Thank you, Jan. Your insight is always very welcome.
Thank you. And I love joining you on the pod.
Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a de-hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So my top tip this week is a clip from a podcast called Be Well by Kelly, which I will link to in the show notes. And being interviewed is podcast favourite James Clear. So listen to James being wise as usual.
Talk to me about timing and getting people just in the habit of doing something without a time restriction.
Yeah. So I think if you can only remember one thing from this conversation, I feel like the 2-minute rule is the thing to remember, because it can apply to pretty much any habit. So the 2-minute rule says, take whatever habit you're trying to build and you scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or meditate every day for the next 3 months becomes meditate for 60 seconds, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And like you said, sometimes people resist it because they're like, okay, buddy, like I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out, right? I know I'm actually trying to do the workout. So if this is some kind of mental trick and I know it's a trick, then like, why would I fall for it, basically? And I get where people are coming from, but I have this reader, his name's Mitch. I mentioned him in Atomic Habits, and he's lost over 100 pounds, kept it off for over a decade. And for the first 6 weeks that he went to the gym, he had this rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds silly. You're like, obviously this is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you take a step back, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up, right? He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And I think this is a much deeper truth about habits that often gets overlooked, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved, right? It has to become the standard in your life before you can optimize it and scale it up to something more. And for whatever reason, we get very all or nothing about our habits. We're like, if it's not the perfect business idea or the best workout plan or the ideal diet to follow, then we feel like I can't take action yet. I need to learn more. But the truth is, the best way to learn is often by taking action. And so you need to get over that hump. And I think the 2-minute rule helps you do that. It helps you show up. And it's almost always a better idea to do less than you had hoped than to do nothing at all. And so the 2-minute rule kind of helps you get past that to avoid putting up a zero. So it's sort of this kind of like no 0 days mentality. And on any given day, it doesn't count for a whole lot. In the long run, it can be really meaningful, even if it's small, and it's true not just for health and fitness, but for anything, like the person who reads for an extra 10 minutes each day. Well, on any given day, reading for 10 minutes doesn't make you a genius, but over the course of 10 or 20 or 30 years, that can be a really meaningful difference in insight and knowledge. And it adds up and compounds in a way that's surprising, almost regardless of the domain that we're talking about. So I like the 2-minute rule for that reason. It helps you master the art of showing up.
It's good advice. It's good advice. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support, and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.